In the summer of 2000, Enron was a $70 billion empire. Fortune magazine named them America's most innovative company for 6 consecutive years. Yet it took exactly 24 days for that massive corporate structure to declare bankruptcy, wiping out 20,000 jobs and sending the stock price crashing down to 26 cents. To understand how a collapse of that magnitude happens, you have to look at the man who built the company, Kenneth Lay. Back in the 1980s, Lay was a fierce advocate for deregulating the energy market. He believed that freeing natural gas from government price controls would open up massive new financial opportunities. When deregulation actually arrived, Lay made a sharp strategic pivot. He took Enron from a traditional company that moved physical natural gas through actual pipes and turned it into an energy trading firm. Enron became a market maker, sitting between producers and buyers, packaging energy contracts and taking a fee for managing the risk. This pivot meant Enron was no longer valued on physical assets. Wall Street was suddenly judging them as a high-flying trading operation. To keep investors happy and the stock price climbing, the company now needed to show constant financial growth every single quarter. They built a trap of expectations, and very quickly they realized they couldn't satisfy it using standard math. That brings us to Jeffrey Skilling, a former consultant brought in to run the new trading division. Skilling needed a way to manufacture that massive growth on paper. So in 1991, he asked the Securities and Exchange Commission for permission to use an industry-first accounting method called mark-to-market for their long-term energy contracts. The SEC said yes. This diagram shows how mark-to-market actually works. Normally, if you sign a 20-year contract to deliver gas, you record the revenue slowly, year by year, as you actually get paid. Mark-to-market does the opposite. It allows a company to estimate what they think the entire 20-year contract will be worth in the future and book 100% of that theoretical profit on day one. Enron was legally reporting hundreds of millions in profit on their public financial statements based entirely on guesses about future gas prices. But as this hollowed-out block reveals, those celebrated contracts were generating zero actual cash in the present day. Enron had designed a machine that printed fake money on their balance sheets. Since the profits were booked instantly, the only way to keep reporting earnings the next quarter was to sign even more contracts. They were locked in an endless cycle, forced to take on wilder, riskier deals just to cover up the fact that there was no real cash coming in the door. To feed this machine, Skilling implemented a brutal performance system known internally as rank and yank. Every 6 months, the bottom 15 to 20% of employees were fired. Traders were intensely incentivized to book any deal possible, no matter how speculative, just to survive the review. Anyone who raised questions about where the actual cash was coming from was marked as a liability and quickly shown the door. But those theoretical deals were inevitably losing value in the real world, and the mounting losses had to go somewhere. Enron's chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, was given a specific mandate: find a way to hide the massive debt accumulating off those failing investments. Fastow exploited a very specific accounting loophole regarding special purpose entities, or SPEs. This animation shows the mechanic. Enron could dump its bad debt into these secondary, off-book shell companies. As long as an outside investor provided at least 3% of the capital, the entire entity, along with its billions in debt, was removed from Enron's public reports. To the outside world, the losses simply vanished. The catch was that Fastow himself was managing these shell companies while simultaneously serving as Enron's CFO. Enron's board of directors signed formal waivers to allow this conflict of interest. This gave Fastow the freedom to sit on both sides of the negotiating table, routing over $30 million in secret management fees directly into his own pockets. To fund these entities, Enron was largely using its own stock. They were creating outside companies capitalized with Enron shares, and then using those same companies to insure Enron against its own investment losses. It was a circular, fraudulent loop. The entire illusion held together as long as the stock price went up. If the stock ever dipped, both Enron and its supposed insurance policy would crash simultaneously. Back in Houston, the company was bleeding real money. Desperate for actual cash flow, Enron's trading desk turned its attention westward. In 1996, California had deregulated its wholesale electricity market, untapping the prices power companies could charge the state grid. Looking at this chart, you can see exactly how Enron exploited the state. Traders used schemes with names like Death Star and Fat Boy to deliberately take power plants offline, claiming they needed fake maintenance during the hottest days of the year. By withholding the supply of electricity, they manufactured artificial scarcity, driving wholesale energy prices up 800%. There was no actual shortage of power. It was simply more profitable to shut the grid off. When internal phone calls were eventually released, the public heard Enron traders openly laughing about the rolling blackouts sweeping the state. They joked about stealing money from poor grandmothers in California, callously referring to their victims as Grandma Millie. The accounting tricks in Houston were now inflicting profound, tangible damage on the real world. Millions of residential customers lost power, hospitals were forced to run on backup generators, and local businesses had to shut their doors. By the time it was over, the manufactured crisis drained an estimated $40 billion from California's economy. The collapse was ultimately triggered by two women asking the questions nobody else would. In early 2001, Fortune reporter Bethany McLean published an article asking exactly how Enron made its money, pointing out their total lack of obvious cash flow. Months later, Enron executive Sharon Watkins wrote a blistering internal memo directly to Ken Lay, warning him that the shell companies were fraudulent and the company was heading for a devastating accounting scandal. Lay ignored the warning, but Wall Street eventually caught on. In October, Enron was forced to admit they had falsely reported over $500 million in profits. Once the credit agencies realized Enron's hidden debt was totally unpayable, they downgraded the company to junk status. In just 24 days, the seventh largest corporation in America entered its death spiral, culminating in complete bankruptcy. As the ship went down, the executives made sure to secure their own lifeboats. In the year leading up to the collapse, Ken Lay and other executives quietly sold off $70 million in personal Enron stock. At the exact same time, the company entered a lockdown period for its retirement plans, legally freezing the 401k accounts of its 20,000 employees. 20,000 people watched their careers and their financial futures vanish in less than a month. These employees followed the corporate rules, only to watch their life savings disappear because of executives who treated those same rules as obstacles to be circumvented. The fraud survived for a decade because the watchdogs looked the other way. Arthur Andersen was one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world, and they had signed off on Enron's financial statements for years. When the SEC inquiry began, Andersen's legal team instructed their audit staff to destroy the evidence. In a coordinated effort, they shredded tons of incriminating documents related to the Enron account. The scale of the deception forced Congress to rewrite the rules of American capitalism. In 2002, they passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. For the first time, CEOs and CFOs were required to personally certify the accuracy of their financial reports, facing strict criminal penalties if those statements were faked. But legal reforms can only fix so much. After serving 5 years in federal prison, Andy Fastow started speaking publicly about how the fraud actually worked. He pointed out something deeply unsettling. Almost every mechanism he used to hide billions in debt was, at the time, technically compliant with accounting rules. He followed the exact letter of the law while completely violating its spirit. Enron stands as a failure of individual ethics, but it also exposes a failure of the entire corporate oversight system. The incentives of executive compensation, the willful blindness of auditors, and the complexity of modern accounting created an environment where ordinary ambition mutated into corruption. If we don't continuously police the gap between what is legally permitted and what is actually honest, the same collapse is destined to happen again.